Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. He's about music, movies, art and culture, and this is Billboard Breakdown. So, okay, after last week, I was hoping for a bit of a breather this week, just to cool down a little bit. And believe it or not, I actually got it. After the storm comes a little bit of calm, and we might have one of the least active weeks of the Hot 100 of 2015 thus far. Thanks to the album release schedule slowing down a little bit, just give us all a breather. And considering I used most of this week to catch up on releases I wouldn't have otherwise covered, or were just behind in my backlog, it's kind of nice that Billboard Breakdown also feels a little bit easier as we come into the summer months. And interestingly, that trend actually continued into our top 10, where things are pretty slow this week, or at least not all that surprising. Unsurprisingly, See You Again by Wiz Khalifa and Charlie Puth absolutely ruled the week, again with the sizable airplay gains compensating for the shrinking sales and still ruling streaming. And considering that the song hasn't shown the slightest signs of slowing down, I reckon unless something smashes in from out of nowhere, it looks like it might have some real longevity at the top, which honestly, I didn't expect. Right behind it at number 2, we've got Trap Queen by Fetty Wap, which is seen as the closest challenger with strong sales and absolutely huge streaming, so always had that, but airplay did kind of slow this week. I'm not sure it's got quite the swell to take it right to the top. Then we had Earned It by The Weeknd, regained its peak at number 3 thanks to still holding on to some radio dominance, but I get the feeling it's less because of that song's strengths and more due to weaknesses lower down on the charts. Because even though it did have a good sales week, streaming has been mostly static, and airplay at the very top, it's been kind of wavering. It took over the spot of Uptown Funk by Mark Ronson and Bruno Mars, which might still have a lot of dominance on YouTube and still respectable streaming, but that's pretty much it. As sales dropped even further and airplay's been steadily falling away. It's really only as high as it is thanks to extended radio inertia. But where things get interesting, Shut Up and Dance by Walk the Moon, which was nearly matching See You Again for radio airplay gains, right behind it in sales, and yet is kind of feels stalled out because streaming hasn't picked up in the same way. I mean, it'll probably take Uptown Funk's spot in a week or two, or maybe be Earned It if the airplay just collapses there, but it's probably not going to go much higher. Beneath it, we've got Sugar by Maroon 5 somehow still holding steady at number 6. We had slipped in every single category except YouTube, but didn't do so quickly enough to fall faster. Looks to be a similar case of Love Me Like You Do by Ellie Goulding, with losses pretty much across the board, really relying on airplay to prop it up at number 7 against painfully weak sales numbers. And yet that airplay was enough to hold off Want You to Want Me by Jason Derulo at number 8, which did have gains all this week across the board, and yet bizarrely streaming's been kind of inconsistent. Not really quite enough to really shove it over the top and break it into the top 5. Then we had Thinking Out Loud by Ed Sheeran rising up to number 9. And let's make this clear, it wasn't because that song had huge gains. Yeah, better than average sales week, but airplay and streaming were stalled or continuing to fall off. Similar case with GDFR by Flo Rida, Look Out and Stage the Gemini, re-entering the charts at number 10, as it lost hard this week across the board. Nope, the reasons these songs came back is because T-Wayne's Nasty Freestyle dropped out as streaming started to slip and radio pretty much gave it, you know, as much as it deserved. Nothing. In other words, well, it might have gotten high, kind of like Selfie by the Chainsmokers. I don't see it lasting much longer in the Hot 100, and for good reason, because both songs sucked. And on that note, let's talk about our losers and dropouts, of which there weren't a lot this week whatsoever. I mean, our biggest dropout, Centuries by Fall Out Boy, which is on its way out naturally, and Legend by Drake, which shouldn't have lasted as long as it did anyways on the charts. As for our losers, most of them aren't all that surprising. Say You Do by Dierks Bentley reaching the natural end of its chart run, sliding down to 66. Homegrown by the Zac Brown Band drops to 57 as the hype around the album starts to fade, and Nobody Loved by Tori Kelly takes a sharp drop to 95 because, well, it hasn't really caught on the way that I personally expected it would. The one drop that did surprise me in hindsight was I Want You to Know by Zedd and Selena Gomez. Yeah, it's been slipping for the past few weeks and it's kind of a mediocre song, but considering Zedd's dropping a new album very recently, you'd think it'd been given a little bit more of a push. I would have thought that song would have lasted longer, especially going into the summer months. And believe it or not, we had even less major gains this week. The first was One Hell of an Amen by Brantley Gilbert, gaining a little bit of traction to 85. No real surprise at that. Gilbert's been missing a hit on the radio since Small Town Throwdown left the charts, and of his singles, this is probably the best of them, even if there are better songs off the album. Then you had Believe by Mumford & Sons surge up to 54, which is no real surprise. The album had a very solid opening sales week, although significantly weaker than when Babel was dropped. Not exactly a surprise, because While Their Mind is a lot worse, but you can bet the public's response is more into the change in sound and less to any actual standard of quality. The third and most intriguing jump is Cheerleader by Oh My, which continued its rise to 47. And even though I'm kind of ambivalent on most of the song, it's lightweight enough that I can see this easily cracking the top 10 hits it has in Canada for a while now. Even though it's not particularly my taste, it's still a good song, and the Canadian charts are always better. But you know what, that's just a matter of time to determine how high it's gonna go in the US, so let's go to our returning entries. And there were none of them this week. Only 6 new songs on the charts as a matter of fact, so let's get this started. Number 99, Shine On by Sawyer Fredericks.
Shine on, there'll be time enough for darkness when everything's gone. Shine on, shine on.
You know it's not a good season for The Voice when you only have one new song from the show landing on the Hot 100, and it's from the top 6. And it's even worse when said song is from Sawyer Fredericks, easily one of the least impressive contestants I've seen on the show in the wild. Now granted, this probably didn't help matters that the song is from relative unknown Daisy Maine Earlwine, but overall a pretty solid alternative country folk song that honestly has some pretty solid melodies and textures, at least in the versions that I heard that were from live cuts. And thus, Sawyer Fredericks strips it back even further, neutering some of the more strident country melodies and tries to replace it with some pretty bare bones harmonies with full choirs. And while I do like the addition of more fiddles and Sawyer's voice is playing in a much more comfortable range for him, I miss the more prominent melody line, and ultimately this version does feel a little bit underwhelming to me. Not exactly bad, let's keep that in mind. Even on the few weeks that Sawyer's been on this show, I've frequently lambasted him. He has gotten to be a better singer, but you know, it's nothing all that special outside of giving some attention to an artist who could definitely use it. Props to that, I'll give him that, but otherwise, it's okay, I guess. Number 93, The Night Is Still Young by Nicki Minaj. Well, took it long enough. By this point, it's a fairly regular process with Nicki Minaj singles. She leads off with the rap singles, and just when the hype starts to fade, she throws on the lightweight dance song to grab everybody's attention. Now, like with most of her hip-hop songs, I tend to have mixed luck with her poppier hits, and this song is another example of that. Keep in mind that my favorite of these songs in this vein that Nicki has put out is Pound the Alarm, mostly because it's the brightest and one of the most aggressively stupid songs she's ever made, and I mean that as a compliment. This song is a lot more measured and restrained, arguably a little bit smarter, but it suffers for it by playing her vocals in a lower range with a slower tempo and a much quieter melody line. Even with the solid bass and guitar lick, the party vibe of this song is more muted and desperate. And even if you could argue that the tone was intentional, and there's really not much in the lyrics to support that, it doesn't quite click as well as, say, DJ Scott Is Fallen in Love by Usher or Die Young by Kesha that plays in that similar desperate vein. Instead, this oddly reminds me more of We Can't Stop by Miley Cyrus, a party song that ultimately feels like more of the opposite. Not quite as bad as that song was, but still nothing I can really recommend. I mean, it's okay, but nothing special. She's done better. Number 89, Classic Man by Jidenna featuring Roman GianArthur. Ladies and gentlemen, you thought the DJ Muster would be the one to give you the new version of Fancy, but I give you the most blatantly obvious ripoff yet. Seriously, listen to that synth tone, percussion, and gang vocals. You lay the two tracks on top of each other, most people could not tell the difference. And you know what's a damn shame that it's coming from Jidenna, who's affiliated with Janelle Monáe of all people, and is just about as unconvincing as Iggy Azalea was on Fancy. As much as people hated that song, and I wasn't one of them, overall just pretty indifferent on Fancy as a whole, at least Iggy was trying to make a rough edge track, and she's got a decent flow, I'll give her that. Jidenna, on the other hand, with his sing-talk cadence and completely lazy attempt at rhyming, wants to sound like a classic man, elegant and old-fashioned, and yet this is the instrumentation he chooses, paired with lyrics about slinging cocaine and behaving like a classic old-school gangster? No samples of retro soul or jazz or from a mafia movie or even West Coast G-Funk? No, I'm sorry, I don't buy this for a damn second, and the fact that the ripoff is so blatant and obvious means that this will hopefully be pretty disposable. We had a hard enough time tolerating Fancy last year. Next, number 87, I Need Your Love by Shaggy featuring Mohombi, Faybee, and Costi.
I need your love, I need your love, I need your la la la.
Okay, seriously, is this 2001 or something? Do we really have a new song from Shaggy of all people in the charts? For those of you who don't know, and by most of you, probably those who are a lot younger, like 15 or so, Shaggy might have had initial success with Boombastic in 1995, but he hit it absolutely huge with the double hitter of It Wasn't Me with Rick Rock and Angel with Ray Vaughn at the end of the millennium, and then promptly dropped off the face of the earth. Well, okay, that's not quite the case, because believe it or not, he's continued to drop albums for the past 15 years, most of which have done nothing in the States. For this non-album single, though, he rounded up Mohombi, which if you're from anywhere outside the US, you'd know him from Bumpy Ride, which is a damn great song from I think it was 2011, Australian Lebanese singer Faybee, and Romanian singer Costi for this track, which opens with an oscillating guitar before breaking into a thicker, deeper, punchier progression that's actually ridiculously catchy and anchored by a pretty solid backing melody. I actually really like the composition of the song, even though I do feel it'd be nice if the song actually settled on a decent groove and actually stuck with it. It kind of switches up a lot. It's also a little bit weird this song opts to be a song where both Shaggy and Mohombi are pleading for their girls not to leave them and promising to be more attentive. And I'll give them this, they sound good on the track, just a bit of an odd subject for a song with this sort of vibe. Certainly a lot more memorable than the other two singers though. As it is, it feels a little bit overstuffed and probably could have done a little bit better to emphasize that guitar line a little more if it was trying to be this year's Bailando. But although I can predict this, if Cheerleader blows up huge, I would not be surprised to see I Need Your Love following it, and overall, I'd be okay with that. Number 78, Coffee by Miguel.
These moments and vibrant. You wordplay turns into gunplay, gunplay turns into pillow talk turns into sweet dreams turn into coffee in the morning.
Now this is more like it. Miguel's Kaleidoscope Dream back in 2012 won him a lot of critical acclaim by having just enough imagination and good wordplay to support a vocal presence that wasn't really as distinctive. But even though I would argue it's still good and actually conveyed a lot of joy and was actually surprisingly expressive when you dug into it. And this newest single, prime example of that again, as Miguel's understated performance could easily be overlooked if it wasn't just plain that he's knocking the song out of the park with an effortless poise that's kind of admirable in its own way. I really liked it. And that's not even touching the instrumentation, which beefs up the synth with an incredibly tight distorted bass with just enough tasteful reverb to intensify the understated 808s and that skittering keyboard line. The song just builds to this breathless energy that fits the young recklessness of the lyrics so damn well. It's kind of hyperbolic to be sure, mentioning gunplay of all things, but it's so damn sincere and balances that restraint with raw exuberance so damn well, it's incredibly infectious. Dear God, I like the Torn, but with Coffee, Miguel has brought something that is so much up my alley with R&B, I'm definitely hyped for the album. Now, please, America, for some reason, you're choosing not to make King Kunta or Bill's huge hits, but Coffee, this is the sort of song that absolutely deserves it. Miguel, great work. My God, this song is recommended. And finally, number 29, Pretty Girls by Britney Spears and Iggy Azalea. I've been asked to cover the song ever since it dropped, and I've been delaying this effort ceaselessly because, to be honest, I really don't care. Right now, Iggy Azalea is fighting for anything that might bring her the slightest hint of relevance after the backlash that hit her follow-up singles after Black Widow. And Britney Spears' career is a good 4 years past its expiration date, if not longer. And yet, I knew I'd eventually have to cover the song when it landed on Billboard Breakdown, and oh God, I'm glad I avoided this, because this might be one of the most grating and obnoxious tracks I've heard since Bitch Better Have My Money by Rihanna. Can we start with the fact that the low-end synth barely passes for a melody, and try to pair it with a twinkling high sounds more creepy than enticing, especially with explosive blasts of snap percussion and blocky chunks of pitch-shifted hi-hats that match the gang vocals? In other words, I thought we already had Fancy Mark II this week. I didn't want to cover two of these. Then we have to get to our performers, which I'd actually argue Iggy actually comes out ahead in sounding slick and poised, where Britney's trying to make her lower range emote with so much auto-tune piled on as much as possible, trying to imitate Charlie XCX's vocal inflection. Instead, it just sounds insufferably obnoxious, at least until we get to the verses where the multi-tracking kinda helps. And then lyrically, what is there to say about this? It's a song that has the substance of Valley Girl, trying to fuse it with some spacey imagery to make it somewhat remotely interesting. Except when Frank Zappa made that sort of song, he was spoofing this sort of vapid behavior instead of celebrating it. It's not even hyperbolic in a ridiculous way like TikTok by Kesha was. Kesha at least understood she was going to make this sort of song. She emphasized the trashiness in a way that stood a chance of being populist, or at least self-aware, which was appreciated. This song, on the other hand, is so insufferably pleased with itself that it makes my skin crawl. Disgusting. I don't want to hear this again. So yeah, for this week, really, it was honestly pretty good, at least in terms of my workload. For the best of the week, Coffee by Miguel easily runs away with it. Fantastic song. But I Need Your Love by Shaggy, Mohombi, Faybee, and Costi is pretty solid too. I like it. For the worst, oh god, it's not even close here, with both of our fancy wannabes snagging the slots. With Jidenna and Roman GianArthur at least rising to dishonorable mention for having a little bit more restraint to this. Pretty Girls, Britney Spears, and Iggy Azalea easily takes the worst, and good riddance for it. Knowing our luck, it'll probably end up sticking around thanks to the combined star power of both artists, but we can hope for better, and honestly, we should be expecting better. But that's all for this week. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Billboard Breakdown on Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.